The narrative arc. Storytelling structure. What is the narrative arc? The narrative arc refers to the structure and shape of a story. A story contains a beginning, middle, and end. The narrative arc is a way of plotting or planning the beginning, middle, and end of a story. Like a mountain. As a diagram, the arc looks like a mountain or an upside down V. The top of the mountain is always the middle of the story, at the highest point of the narrative. Elements of the narrative arc include exposition, conflict, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. Exposition. The exposition introduces the story. It sets up the characters and setting. It gives the audience important information about characters and setting that support the rest of the story. For example, in the exposition of Up, we learn that Mr. Fredricksen sold helium balloons and his wife dreamed of going to South America. We also learn that he made a promise to his wife to take her there. This helps us to understand later why he chooses to go to South America so that he can fulfill his promise, and how he knew how to fly his house there using helium balloons. The conflict is the challenge that arises for the main character or protagonist. It also usually involves the antagonist. The conflict is the problem between the protagonist and the antagonist. They are always on opposite sides of this problem. For example, in Up, the conflict arises when Mr. Fredricksen and Russell meet Kevin and Doug. Russell wants to keep Kevin as a pet, yet Doug is hunting the bird for his master, Mr. Muntz. Russell, of course, wants to save Kevin. All of this disrupts Mr. Fredricksen's plans, as all he wants to do is to get his house to Paradise Falls so he can fulfill the promise made to his wife. Rising action. The rising action is made up of the events that occur after the conflict. These events build the tension up the mountain, so to speak. That is, these events propel the plot towards the climax. For example, the rising action in Up includes such events as when Mr. Fredricksen and Russell are chased by Alpha and his dog pack, and their meeting with Mr. Muntz. The climax is the highest point of the story. The climax is when the problem between the protagonist and the antagonist really comes to a head. It is the moment the audience has been waiting for. For example, in the film Up, one of the moments of climax is when Mr. Muntz discovers that Mr. Fredricksen and Russell have seen the bird Kevin and may be protecting it. Mr. Muntz promptly drops his good guy act and shows his true colors. The story of Up is a complex one, however, so that Mr. Fredricksen's rescue of Russell later in the film becomes another climax point. Falling action. The falling action consists of the events that occur after the climax and bring the story to its resolution. For example, in Up, the falling action involves Muntz's capture of Kevin and later Russell and Muntz's trapping them all in the house. Resolution. The resolution is where all the loose ends of the story are tied up and the problem or conflict is solved or resolved. For example, in Up, the resolution comes when Mr. Muntz snags his foot on the balloon lines and falls to his death. This resolves the problem because he is no longer after the bird. The house later lands right next to Paradise Falls, thus fulfilling Mr. Fredricksen's promise to his wife. Mr. Fredricksen and Russell fly Muntz's blimp back to their hometown in America, and Mr. Fredricksen presents Russell with his Helping the Elderly badge, and they all live happily ever after. Theme. While the theme itself is not a part of the narrative arc structure, Plotting the arc of the story helps us to figure out the theme. The theme always has something to do with the conflict, its climax, and its resolution. The theme is what the protagonist, the main character, has learned as a result of the challenges they faced in the story. For example, Up has several themes, including the value of love and friendship, you're never too old to have an adventure, follow your dreams, and don't give up, just keep trying.